Hello and welcome to Zoom with Czarny. I'm Dustin Czarny, Democratic Elections Commissioner for Onondaga County, and this is my weekly interview show. We're getting back in the swing of things, and this week we have the Fayetteville Village candidate, Sara Bollinger, who is running for mayor, and Casey Cleary-Hammerstadt, who's running for village board. These two candidates are running on the Democratic line as well as their own independent lines in the March 19th election. We also talk a little bit about the proposition to move the Fayetteville elections from March to November. So please stay tuned for that. This week, we've had Super Tuesday, which has resulted at the time of this taping in all but three candidates suspending their campaigns. Donald Trump on the Republican side is the only candidate with a viable campaign running right now. And I'm taping this on Wednesday night. So if things change on the Democratic side, Dean Phillips has dropped out, meaning that only Joe Biden and Marianne Williamson have viable campaigns. As you may have recalled, Marianne Williamson suspended her campaign in early February and then reanimated it in late February, right before Super Tuesday. And it's yet to be known whether she's going to come out of that or not. That does mean that we will have an April 2nd primary, though, whether she suspends her campaign or not, and on the Republican side as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my Commissioner in the Car this next week. But for now, stay tuned and listen to Casey Cleary-Hammerstadt and Sara Bollinger, who are running for offices in the village of Fayetteville. Enjoy. And we're back, and I'm so happy to have my good friends, Casey Cleary and Sara Bollinger. They are candidates for the village of Fayetteville. Casey's running for village board, and Sara is running for the mayor of Fayetteville. Sara, Casey, thanks for coming on Zoom with Czarny.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, people may wonder why we're talking about an election right now, but that's because village elections happen in March or June or November. And we'll talk a little bit about what the choice is on that a little bit later. But this election will be happening just around the corner on March 19th, a little less than 2 weeks from now. And Fayetteville elections have been pretty contentious for the last couple of cycles. And the village of Fayetteville is a Democratic village, and Sara and Casey are running on the Democratic line. But we'll start with you, Sara. I know you've been on this program before, but why don't you give us a little background on who you are, and what your background is?
So I have worked primarily in the not-for-profit area. So I've been a manager and a leader with people who, working in various different kinds of social service organizations over the course of my career. I've been in Central New York the whole time. I have not lived in Fayetteville my whole life, but I have been in Central New York my whole life, pretty much. And I think for me, what I try to bring to things is a collaborative approach. When you work, I don't know if everybody knows this, but when you work for a nonprofit, you have 15 or 20 bosses because you work for a board of directors. So you have to get pretty good at listening to what people are trying to say and understanding what kinds of issues are motivating them. They are all volunteers, the board members, in a nonprofit. So they do this because they care, and they've hired you to make something happen. And that's kind of been my background for my career. I do have a husband. My daughter lives in the area as well. She's married and has 2 children. So I have other relatives that live in the area. I definitely have roots in Fayetteville.
And of course, you've been on the Manlius Town Board for the last several years. In
Yeah.
fact, you were kind of the harbinger for the Democratic takeover of the town board. You were one of the first elected Democrats to Manlius townwide in many years, and started the kind of run that we've seen there as well, right?
I think I was the point person, but it wouldn't have happened without the team. So.
Right, that's right. And speaking of the team, we got Casey, who's a big part of the village teams. Casey Cleary, you ran for village board in 2020 and kind of started this, awakening of competitiveness in the village of Fayetteville. But and you've been on our program before, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Dustin. Well, I haven't lived here all my life, and in some ways, I think that that could be an advantage. I grew up on Long Island, and one of the things about Long Island is it has been developed to the utmost. And I have attended SUNY Cortland, and then Syracuse University, worked in the community, also like Sara, in the not-for-profit world. All of the agencies I worked for were related to children and family services. And my education at Syracuse University in public administration at the Maxwell School is kind of foundational to who I am, both in terms of my code of ethics, but my skill set. And I think one of the things that helps me to do is understand the intergovernmental relationships with the village, the town, the county, and the state. I raised my two kids here. They've flown the nest, and I don't think they're coming back. And we've been here in the village for 21 years in the Brookside neighborhood, which is no longer a secret of a gem. It's very popular now. And we see our real estate assessments rising very rapidly out here. So my interest in the village came about because of development projects, and those development projects are still not developed. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but thanks. As an opening, I think that's good.
Yeah, no, and we're gonna stick with you, Casey, and then we'll go back to you, Sarah. We'll kind of ping back, bong back and forth, and go in different orders. But Casey, why are you running again? You ran in 2020, and you ran a write-in campaign during the pandemic, and that election kind of changed things for Fayetteville. Not, it showed that maybe the villages shouldn't be running their own election, and the Board of Elections had to come in because of some improper balloting. Nothing nefarious, just as something that, just didn't seem proper in the terms of the design of the ballot. But so, you've kind of already made some change, and then you took a cycle off, but now you're back and you're running for village board. So why are you running?
Well, technically speaking, this is my third time running. So 2018 was my test balloon, and I learned so many things because basically my family and I made it up like what we saw on TV. And since that time, it has been a great benefit to me to have wonderful people helping to advise me to how to do this, because it is not my natural inclination to be a politician or to run for office. In 2022, I ran a full campaign, and things were going really well until February of that year, about 3 weeks out from the election, when I fell at someone's door on a hill on the ice of their step, and I sustained a concussion. I broke my wrist, I hurt my neck and my shoulder, and I was out. And I lost that race by only 47 votes, and I have since felt like I didn't have it all out on the field, and I want to come back because I see the same things that I saw in 2020 that need to be addressed. I see a lethargic board that isn't getting as much done as it should be in a timely fashion. And I think that we need board members who have more energy to accomplish those projects. I'd like to see our board really focus on implementing the comprehensive plan, because comprehensive plan is the marching orders that we have, the best marching orders that we know of from the villagers. And there's a lot of work in that, but I don't hear enough progress on the comprehensive plan. And I will just leave it at that. It's not the only issue I want to talk about, but implementation of a plan is much more important than just developing it.
Yeah, definitely. And Sarah, you've had, as I mentioned before, a very successful time on the Manlius Town Board, and you're not term limited. You could continue there, but you're running to give that all up and running for mayor of Fayetteville. I think some people would see that as a step down, but I know that that's not, and I want you to explain why you're running for the village of Fayetteville mayor.
Well, basically, I see the need. I have been very involved with Fayetteville, even though I'm not, I am on the town board, but I follow the Fayetteville board very closely, and I did previously serve on the planning board and the comprehensive plan committee. So I've been pretty involved with what Fayetteville is working on. And I think that the leadership piece was what I felt I could contribute, that the trustees that are there are all well-meaning, but they need somebody to help them row in the same direction. And I think that that has, I think with the vacancy in the mayor's position, I felt that there was a need to have somebody that, and I thought that I could be able to be a leader who could help them all get organized and work on basically what Casey just said, on implementation of plans. There's a lot of good things about Fayetteville. This is not a place that needs to be, ripped up and redone. It's fine the way it is. What is lacking, I think, is the coordinated effort toward moving toward goals together in an organized and communicated fashion.
Mhm.
So we're going to stick with you, Sarah, again
Mhm.
on this next question, which you both have actually kind of touched on. But what are some of Fayetteville's greatest needs? What if if you are elected? What are some of the needs that you think you can address in office?
So I think one of the things that needs to be addressed is to have a balanced approach to growth and development. So we don't want to just stay nothing, never, nothing can happen ever again. But at the same time, we hear repeatedly from residents the concern about sort of whatever their definition of inappropriate development is. We hear a lot of concerns about traffic. We hear concerns about safety, actually pedestrian safety. So things like that would be to make sure that whatever development happens, it's consistent with the character of the community and that it respects the mobility issues of people that are trying to get in and out of the village. So those are some things that I think would really become important. No matter who's in the trustee position, those kinds of development goals will come up. That is also true for members of the planning board. It's always going to be something that we deal with. Some of the other issues I'm interested in dealing with is around making sure we're prepared for potential emergencies with climate change. We know that we get heavier downpours. We have had flooding of Limestone Creek in the past. I believe it's part of our responsibility to be sure that we're planning for, mitigating, adjusting rules to try to make sure that we don't have a lot of damage from flooding and that we keep our infrastructure in good shape. In this case, meaning sort of storm drain type infrastructure, because the village is pretty old. So some of its pipes are pretty old too. So I just feel it's important that we keep track of those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's amazing how much climate change is affecting local politics now. It's not just a national issue. It's about, sewer water drainage and, and just, responding to the events that are happening in the world. And it's local leadership that makes up a lot of that response. That's so I'm so glad that you brought that up. Now, Casey, Sarah mentioned that she's running for an open seat, but you're running against two incumbents. But what are, some of the issues in Fayetteville that you're hoping to address in office that maybe haven't been addressed?
Well, I'd like to point out that this is the second time I'm running from a part of the village that is not represented on the board. Now, all of us on the board represent everyone in the village, but the experience of people who are on the east side of the village is a little bit different, I think, than the people who are in the historic part of the village, where 3 out of the 4 current people serving live. If you talk to people around here, which I do, we are very concerned about traffic. And in some cases, in some ways, I think we're like the canary in the coal mine, because the traffic gets stopped in the middle of the village, but all of us who are trying to empty out from multiple neighborhoods at peak traffic periods have a very difficult time and have noticed a huge change over time. And our plan addresses pedestrian safety, but we really need to talk with the state about what it means to maintain a village character width of state route going right through it. We have a lot of truck activity, which affects the quality of life of many of the residents here on this end because they come over a hill and they're braking and it's very loud. People talk about this all the time, much more so on this half of the village. The other thing is, I mentioned early on that we're seeing our property assessments skyrocket. It's really kind of shocking, and it is just kind of balancing out what it should have been. But people are very concerned about spending, and they're concerned that their increased assessments without any kind of other types of reining in on spending is going to mean higher taxes for them. And they're seeing the higher taxes in other municipalities. So they would like the village to be very careful about every penny it spends. And that's one of the things that I want to come to the table and say, how can we make this best for our taxpayers who are very concerned about the trend here? I'm also interested in communicating more with our village using things that we've invested in, like live streaming. We invest in live streaming, and it can happen in a two-way basis. So you could talk just like this, but we don't use it. And then there are things like we allow villages to speak at meetings, but we don't invite them to do so. Only the people who know that they can do that have that opportunity. And again, the live streaming would allow people to participate in a two-way fashion from home. So in some ways, I'm interested in how we do things. I think what the village does is excellent in a lot of ways, but in terms of the administration of the village, I think we need to look under the hood and at how we're doing some things and strengthen them and make them lean more towards villager participation and villager engagement.
Yeah, transparency in small government, and usually the smaller you go, the more problems there are in transparency. And sometimes it's budget, but also sometimes it's just will. We've seen a lot of people try to bring this issue to the forefront in this kind of awakening political environment over the last 8 years. And, that's and it seems like during the pandemic, I thought that was going to be one of the great things about the pandemic. Not that there's any good thing about the pandemic, but the Zooms, the live streaming, the finding a way to bring politics to the people, and was there. And then you've seen this kind of receding effect since then. But one of the ways that your group is, trying to bring politics back to the people is talking about the election structure itself. And there's been, we're going to start with you, Casey, and then go to you, Sara, on this. But there's also a proposition on the Fayetteville ballot to move the election from March to November. Casey, this is kind of your, you've been kind of the godmother of this. And so it's fitting that we're going to start off with you. Why do you think this was so important? Why did you force a proposition? And why did you have to force this proposition to have this vote on the March ballot?
Well, I think the Fayetteville board, every village is different. So I will just say that. I learned that about Onondaga County villages. But the status of our village board was that we have very, very long-term incumbency. So one of the two people that I am running against has been on the board for 44 years. And another one that I'm running against has been on the planning board for 24 years and on the board now for a year and a half. And if you had looked at this on December 31st at who was on the board, there were 3 people on the board who had served concurrently for 22 years. And so when you come and you say something simple like, let's use the two-way live streaming, or let's have an open podium for everyone, they kind of look at each other and they're like, nah, they're not really open to other ideas. There's not a freshness of their energy in terms of approaching it. So I really want to see the village be able to have new people regularly coming onto the board with new ideas. But it's really difficult to participate, to become a candidate who has a chance at winning if your campaign has to start January 1st and ends in mid-March. Now, we've gotten lucky with some really beautiful days, but those can't be counted on. And I really think that in order to have a freshness on the board, that's a really important reason. And there are others, but I don't want to say them all. So Sara can say some of them too.
I think that, but I'm glad you let off with that, because in the discussions that have been going around the county on this village, election timing period, whether it's here in Fayetteville or over in Baldwinsville, which we'll talk to next week, or Liverpool, which will be discussing this in June, or any of the other villages that have already moved, they always talk about turnout, which I love. Turnout is great, but the idea of competitiveness and having a healthy democracy is a competitive democracy, and these March elections and June elections, the ballot access period happens in a weird timing, and people don't know when they have to do it, and thus don't run for office. And that's been part of the problem. And we've seen it's hard to get people to run for office in the middle of winter, but it's also hard for them to even know that there's an election coming up. Sara, you're running for mayor. You're hopefully will be, your election will be in March, but hopefully if this if the voters pass this petition, then your next election will be in November. What are you in favor of this as well? And what are some of the reasons?
So I think I am in favor of it for the turnout reason, the basic area that if people know an election is happening, there's a higher likelihood that they will vote. So many people just really, especially back before the races were more competitive. Right now, at least there's a bunch of signs out on people's lawns. And so people are saying, well, something must be going on. Maybe I should find out. When the races were very non-competitive, people, I mean, there were years where there were, just a few hundred people even knew there was an election. So I think this is something that's important just on the face of democracy, that just having people know. The other thing that I think I have become more interested in is this idea of inclusiveness of different kinds of candidates. If you work a regular job and you want to go out and pass petitions or talk to voters or drop literature after work in the winter, it is dark. Like today was a beautiful day. I went out after work and I had half an hour, and then I had to come in because it was too dark to read my list. So I think that is a discouragement of younger people, working age people, to run. It's also a discouragement for people who have to work. They're not independently wealthy. So I think these are areas where we don't realize that we're ruling people out from taking a shot at it by some of the circumstances. It's not so obvious. We're not saying, oh, you're not allowed to run, but people look at their life and say, okay, I've only got 6 weeks to run this campaign, and I have these other family obligations on Saturday, and how am I going to do this? So I think the June even is better, like at least it's light in June, but having more time would also make it better. So I think both of those things could increase the number of different kinds of people who would be comfortable running for their position as trustee.
Yeah, that's another point I didn't really think about, and I should have, as I look out my window here and see how dark it is. But yeah, you're right. And just to mention the turnout, because this was mentioned in the Eagle Bulletin article and a few other places, this idea that you get lost in the end of the ballot if you move to November, that hasn't been borne out by the numbers. We've had 5 villages move to November. I have data for the last 3, which was Elbridge and Solvay and Tully, and they saw anywhere from from the last time they had a village election to the time they had it in November, either 150% voter turnout, not just people that showed up and signed in the book, but people who actually cast ballots in the election itself. 150% to 900% more voters actually made choices in the village elections. And that's, that to me trumps, for lack of a better term, any of the worry about being lost on the ballot, because they're obviously not being lost. More citizens are interacting. And that's one of the reasons why I think many of the other villages that moved haven't moved back, because they enjoy that turnout. All right, so I like to end this program after about a half hour. So no, you're gonna get something, Casey. Don't worry. you're gonna get something because I'm going to my infamous last question, which is, what haven't we talked about? So I'm going to start with you, Sarah, and then go to you, Casey. These are your closing thoughts to leave the voters with whatever you want. Sarah, floor is yours.
All right, thank you. So I think that what we haven't talked about a little bit more, or I would like to talk about a little bit more, is how we communicate information to residents and businesses that are located in Fayetteville or do business in Fayetteville or use Fayetteville a lot for whatever reason. Because I think that there is a general lack of understanding of what local government is doing. There is a lack of awareness about things that might be going on. And I think if people knew that something was being deliberated or was on the agenda or might happen in terms of development or road work or parks developing, any of those things, people would be interested in it. They just don't know. And then when they do find out, it's often in some kind of a startlement way, which is not necessarily how they would feel good about it. So I would like to work on how we can communicate more effectively with a variety of modalities in some way so that more people just have a sort of a routine knowledge of what's going on.
And Casey, you started all this, so it's good that you're going to get to finish it. What haven't we talked about for you?
Well, this proposition of moving elections to November, there is a lot more to say, and I have a couple minutes to do it. But when I talk to people about this, and I just want to add that when we passed a petition to put this on the ballot, we had more signatures on that petition than people vote in a lot of elections. So there is an understanding that there's something wrong with this picture because our snowbirds are gone, and that's another factor. And we don't, as Sarah said, the elections have not been publicized. But we have 10 days to vote in November. We have 15 hours to vote in March. When you talk to people about that, they're like, but this is common sense. And we have not heard one single well-reasoned argument for March, except that it's been working very well for 175 years. That's not a well-reasoned argument. There is some talk about the fact that, the people who get elected will not be able to handle budgeting, but that is not a voter-centered argument. That is an argument that kind of suggests that the people who get elected are not going to be able to rise to the occasion of doing the budget. And in my mind, we have another advantage. We can, in a March election, absentee ballots, early mail ballots have to be received on election day, versus in November, they have to be postmarked by election day. And people sometimes procrastinate to the end, the very last day. I am one of those people who sometimes does that. We also save money. It's an unnecessary extra expense in March to have that election because we already pay for professionals to handle our elections in November, and they do it the way it should be done. Now, that's the case for us in Fayetteville because we made that move to having the Board of Elections, but that's not the case everywhere in our county. So there's a number of issues related to villages that are also statewide issues that need to be looked at that I hope that we will get to in future years.
Well, Casey, Sarah, it's been a pleasure. And I can think of no closing argument better than in the home of Matilda Jocelyn Gage, where we have the Matilda Jocelyn Gage museum, that two women are running for office. And Sarah, I'm not sure that there has been a woman mayor.
There has been, yeah, because I would be the second.
You would be the second, okay, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
And yes, the village was founded 175 years ago, and it was working well for the people that it was working well for. If we all remember, 175 years ago, not everybody had the right to vote. So, that's there's always change when it comes to democracy. So, Sarah, Casey, thank you so much. I'm going to put in the show notes the links to your websites and everything like that. But thank you so much for coming on Zoom with Czarny, and Godspeed this spring election.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dustin. You're a champion, and for us nationally, and you get down to the nitty gritty on village elections when it's not even your responsibility. So I appreciate all the guidance, but to some extent, you take it on, but boards of elections statewide don't have this responsibility, and that's something I think needs to look at. But you are the best. Thank you so much.
I think you are the best, and thank you so much for running.
Okay.
Thank
Take care.
you.
And that was my interview with Casey Cleary-Hammerstadt and Sara Bollinger. I am very happy to have talked to them. If you live in the village of Fayetteville, please, on March 19th, go to the polls, 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. in the village of Fayetteville. You can go to onvote.net and get an early voting by mail ballot, or go to the polls in person. There is no early voting in person for village elections. I'm in the middle of kind of retooling the way I do these my content, and starting next week, I think I've decided that I am going to be switching things up. My commissioner in a car will be on Mondays from now on, and and then my weekly wonk will be on Wednesdays starting next week with the villages of Fayetteville and Baldwinsville. I'll be back on doing political subdivisions that are having elections this year starting next week with the weekly wonk on Wednesday. And then my Zoom with Czarny will be on Fridays. Next week I will have the Baldwinsville village candidates. So like and subscribe to DustinCzarny.com, and I hope to see you at the polls if you're in the villages on March 19th, or at the April 2nd zombie primary that's coming up later this month. Bye-bye.